Hello everyone and welcome to the Game Engine programming series where we write a game engine from scratch. In previous two videos we worked on render items and compiling material shaders, and as I mentioned at the end of the last video, I'd like to take some time upgrading to a newer version of Visual Studio as well as make some changes to Primal Engine's code so that we can use it with Primal Plus. So roughly half of this video is me doing the upgrade to Visual Studio 2022 and fixing a few bugs as we go, and the other half is spent on doing some changes that will make Primal more platform independent. Migrating to Visual Studio 2022 sounds like more work than it really is. We just have to open the solution using the new version of Visual Studio and tweak a couple of things. When opening the solution for the first time, Visual Studio will ask us if you'd like to retarget our C++ projects. We want to use the newest platform toolset as well as the latest Windows SDK that is installed. That's all we need to do for C++ projects. For the one and only .NET project that we have, which is the level editor, I'd like to upgrade to .NET 6. Currently we are using .NET Core 3.1 and we can easily change this using the project properties. Looking at the project file, we see that we are now indeed using .NET 6. One more thing that I'd like to configure is setting the optimization for debug and release builds. Totally unrelated to this upgrade, I'd like to change the font we are using to JetBrains font. I don't like ligatures, so I'll use the non-ligature version. That's what the NL here stands for. Building the project happened successfully, and the only suggestion from Visual Studio is that we remove Windows Desktop from the SDK in the project file. Here we also have a warning about an unused local variable in the geometry.cpp in the content tools where we pack the mesh data. And indeed we can remove this variable. Other than that, I think we are done, except someone turned on boldface fonts for everything, so let's uncheck that in the Fonts and Colors options dialog. Oh, by the way, I just remembered, when creating game scripts, we also want to use Visual Studio 2022, so we need to upgrade our automation code. The first issue is that the default EnvDTE DLLs that we can refer to using COM references here don't work anymore, at least not all the time. I think that's because they are using 32-bit code and Visual Studio 2022 is a 64-bit application. I could be wrong, but the fact is that we can't use them like this anymore. On this page you can see that there have been some breaking API changes, and apparently we need to use the EnvDTE DLLs that are distributed using nuget packages. So let's remove these references and install the nuget packages instead. For our use case, we need to install EnvDTE and EnvDTE AT packages for the level editor. On the left side, we can see that now we have these two packages installed. Now we just have to use the program ID for Visual Studio 2022, which has DTE version 17. I also would like to do another small tweak, which is to show the Visual Studio window before opening the solution. Let's run the editor and see if we can create a game project, add scripts, and build the game code. Well, the editor itself is working as it should. It couldn't build the game code DLL, so let's add a script and see what's going on. Here we see that our script was created and added to the project, but we have an error here that we need to fix. Ah, I see. A couple of videos back I improved the include paths, and that's causing the problem. We don't want to set additional include directories for the game project, because that would give access to header files that are otherwise private to the engine. So yeah, unfortunately we need to add back some of those relative paths using ... slashes, which we didn't want to have. Luckily we get an error every time it can't find a header file, so we can get away with only using relative paths where it is really needed. Now we can see our game project getting built successfully. Going back to Primal Solution and rebuilding the engine, we can try creating a brand new game project to make sure everything's working correctly. One thing that doesn't look correct is the fact that our project is still using Visual Studio 2019's toolset. Let's see if we can update that as well. I kind of forgot where we are telling it which toolset to use. Let me see. Maybe setting Visual Studio version in the solution template file will trigger the project to use a newer toolset. Let's create a new game project using the new solution template. Well, that didn't work. Oh wait, the toolset version is of course set in the C++ project file for each build configuration. We can simply change it to version 143, which is the one from Visual Studio 2022. Okay, let's create a new game project and see if it now uses the newer toolset. Awesome, that fixed the issue, and that's also the last thing we needed to do in order to use the new Visual Studio. The next topic for today is integration with Primal+. In case you didn't already know, we have a public repository that's dedicated to accepting community contributions. It's intended to add multiplatform and API support to Primal Engine, since the code that I'm writing in this video series is more geared towards Windows and DirectX. We already have had great contributions from Zach, aka Wang, on Discord, which added the Vulkan API initialization code, as well as support for Linux. He also helped me set up a multi-platform build system using Premake, so that we can build the engine for both Windows and Linux, and possibly for macOS in the future. So here's a huge shout out to Zach for your great help and your contributions, which are as always very much appreciated. Now, as you can read here, in order to use Primal+, we need to copy the code from this repository on top of Primal and run a batch file to generate the project files. To make this work, however, I need to make a couple of changes in Primal's code, which will also make it more platform independent. Let me start by cloning this repository and showing you how it can be used. Keep in mind that I still need to make those changes to Primal Engine, which will make this process look more difficult than it actually is. However, after I make those changes, it's simply a matter of following these steps. So here we have both Primal and Primal+, and I created a new folder where we can merge the two repositories. First we need to copy the code from Primal Engine, and then we copy the code from Primal+. Here we are asked if we would like to overwrite some files, to which we must answer yes. Finally, we generate the project files. Make sure to open the solution using Visual Studio 2022. Here we can see that we have an additional low-level renderer which uses the Vulkan API. Cool, huh? As I mentioned, I need to update Primal's code so that when we copy Primal Plus on top of it, it will build without errors. So let's take on the errors that we get, and by solving them, we hopefully cover everything that we need to do in order to get it to build successfully. The first problem is that we have an enumeration for the graphics API, and it's also defined separately in Primal Plus code. We need to make sure to exclude this one when we are building with Primal Plus. Let me delete this folder first before making changes to Primal's code, and then merge the two repositories again. This sounds rather simple, but obviously according to Windows I don't own this computer and therefore I'm not allowed to delete this folder. Anyway, I'll create another folder later. Let's go back to Primal and make our changes. Looking at this Lua script, which generates the project files, we see that there is a macro definition that we can use to determine if we are building Primal Plus. So if that's the case, we can compile parts of the code differently or even entirely exclude them. Because Primal Plus defines its own graphics platform enumeration, we can exclude the one that's defined here. We also need to use the setPlatformInterface function from Primal Plus because it adds Vulkan support. In addition, we need to change its signature so that we can pass a reference to the platform interface. Also, since this function will be defined elsewhere, we need to add a declaration for it whenever we are building Primal Plus. Let's try merging again and see what we need to do next. So make a new folder, copy Primal code, copy Primal Plus code, say yes to replace files, and run the batch file to generate the project files. The first error tells us that graphics platform is not defined. This is because we excluded this part from our code, but I forgot to include the header file from Primal Plus. So let's add it here. I do these updates in both our merged folder and in Primal project, so we don't have to copy repositories and rebuild projects every time we fix an error. To make it less confusing, I'll display which solution I'm working in the upper right corner of the screen. Now we are getting an error that says that graphics platform has already been defined. I forgot to put a pragma once directive in this header file, which is part of Primal Plus. Adding the directive will get rid of this error. The solution is building successfully, but we still have a couple of warnings that I'd like to have a look at. Some of them are in the Primal Plus code, and I would rather like the community to be involved in improving this code, so I'll leave it as is. The others are in the testrenderer.cpp about unused function parameters. Let me try and see if we can get rid of those. And apparently this buffer variable is overridden by a local variable somewhere I don't really care about, but let's just rename it so we don't get these strange warnings. Nice, now we are building without errors and warnings. Let's try running the test application. Here we have a failed assertion, and I think that's got to do with the fact that we haven't installed the Agility SDK like we did in the previous video. Let me quickly update this Lua script so that when the engine project is generated, it will include a reference to the Agility SDK nuget package. I have to look up what the syntax for this is. I started using Premake last week for the first time, so I don't know everything by heart yet. Okay, so I need to fill in the package name followed by the version number. Got it. Now let's generate the projects again. I do like how fast this is. It takes less than 1 second to generate the projects. It still doesn't work and I'll have to fix it later, but this is not about Primal Engine anymore, so let me just install the nuget package manually and see if we have any other issues running the test application. Great, now it's running without any problems. I'm really excited to see if we can simply change the API to Vulkan. Before running though, I need to comment out some of this code, because we don't have resource upload, cameras and render items in the Vulkan renderer yet. And there it is, now we are using Vulkan for the low-level renderer. I think this is incredibly cool and I hope you do too. Going back to Primal Engine, I'd like to spend the next couple of minutes to do some small changes in order to make it possible for the engine to be built for non-Windows operating systems using compilers other than MSVC. First, we need to exclude Content Loader when we are not building for Windows. This is because we are using some Windows-specific APIs in this file. In the future, we'll have a multiplatform content loader, but for now this will do. I'll also rename the file to indicate that it's used for Windows. This warning only applies to Visual Studio, and we need to exclude it when compiling for other operating systems. Next, we need to also remove these suffixes, because they are Visual Studio specific. I also use the correct header, where these fixed-sized integer types are defined. Apparently on Linux we need to include cstring header in order to be able to use functions like memcopy, so I'll include the header here as well. There are a couple more integer suffixes we need to remove here in the math header. The next issue is in renderer.h, where we have the surface type and a variable with the same name. Although this is fine in Visual Studio, Clang and GCC won't compile it. To make those compilers happy as well, we need to state the full namespace of surface type. We are also using Windows-specific code in engine.cpp and main.cpp. Similar to Content Loader, I'm going to exclude both files from builds for non-Windows operating systems and rename the files accordingly. This is all I wanted to do to improve the multiplatformness of Primal Engine, as well as make it play nice with Primal Plus. Thank you for joining me today, and I hope to see you next time. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, please feel free to like and subscribe. If you join me on Patreon, you'll get access to the code on GitHub, so you don't have to type everything over from the video. Plus there are also other nice goodies and rewards exclusive to my Patreon supporters. Please use the link in the video description to check them out. I hope to see you next time. Until then, take care and happy game engineering!